At some point, somebody who's facing this condition, this depression, they're likely to ask themselves questions. Things like, how in the world did this happen to me? Why did this happen to me? What does it say about me that I'm facing this condition, and everybody else, I look out and I see them and they seem to be immune to it? Whatever it is, they're not facing the same condition. What does it say about me? Well, I'll tell you this, it doesn't mean that you're broken. It does mean that you were raised in a world that is broken. But it also says something very significant about you, that you were called in this life to contact something deeper than the superficial. And that's what we'll look at in this episode. All right. So these questions of how did this happen to me? Why did this happen? The answer to all of those questions is really the same. It's, you were raised in a world that is itself broken, raised by human beings who didn't really know what this life is all about. And so we grew up in the backs of station wagons, listening to our mom and dad misrepresent what life is all about. And they didn't know that they were doing this, but we sat back there in our booster seats, listening to everything in their being broadcast certain ideas to us. Like, you have to become somebody in this life. You have to make your mark. People need to notice you. And other things like your happiness can be stripped away by virtually any person at any moment. And so you have to protect yourself. Nobody said these things, but their whole being, their whole way of living broadcasts them to us. And without knowing it, we picked it up and we carried it forward. And there's really nobody to blame. It isn't that we can just look at our parents and say, why didn't they know better? They didn't know better because they were raised in the same world by parents who were doing the best that they could do, but couldn't find the answers. And faced the same kind of anguish, though, because their character, their nature, what they were born with as their tendencies were different than yours. For them, it manifested in different ways. For you, it manifested as this depression. And so, raised in this condition, raised in this broken world, listening to our parents say you have to be somebody, listening to our parents say, don't let those people see you like this. What'll they think? We slowly acquire ignorance. We acquire ignorance. You think that, well, you're born and you have a certain level of ignorance, and then over the course of your life, you're just trying to learn more about life, and so have some of that ignorance removed or erased. But ignorance is acquired. We take it on. Sometimes just by attachments that we form with people. Sometimes we see the example forcefully in our family. And so in some family, there's a little tyke that's receiving the impression, the message that you must be a lawyer. And if you don't become a lawyer, there's no value to you, or whatever the case might be. doctor, you have to be married, and you must have children. And so we begin to acquire this ignorance of, here are the conditions that I need in order to fulfill my life, in order to be happy. But we weren't born with this ignorance. You might remember, I'm going to play a video that I played in an earlier discussion, in an earlier video. Do you remember this one? This little baby who is as happy as can be, jubilant, ecstatic over the tearing of paper. It's an amazing thing to see. There's actually a little bit of a mystery, one of the mysteries of life in something like this. How does a little baby like this little being who's had almost no experience in life, how does it get this incredibly developed sense of humor? There's nobody who taught that baby how to get lost within this intense humor. They were born here with this. This is part of the mystery of what we're here to discover. But getting back to the point, that little baby, born with a kind of innocence without wisdom. You know, you sit and you watch a baby like that, and you know, you might try to make faces, goo goo goo, and get it to respond to you, and it'll just watch you. And so the things that we might try to employ with adults, try to get them to show us a certain kind of approval, get them to lighten up a little bit, joke around with us, kind of take the edge off of the relationship between us. You can't do that with a baby because it's pure innocence. And so it can't be purchased in the same way that we, in our fallen condition, for lack of a better word, in this condition of having acquired all of this ignorance, that little baby can't be purchased, can't be influenced to give itself away and compromise. And so you get this incredible stare coming back from that baby. Innocence, but no wisdom. And so if we were to use an illustration to help convey this, so here you are, born as this perfect jewel, which that baby represents, and then raised in this world, acquiring ignorance day after day after day, all of the things that I think I'm going to need in order to be happy. And slowly that jewel ends up looking like this, just covered in mud. There's a veil between the real, genuine, authentic part of us and our contact with life. There's a veil between it, this caked on mud that's on the jewel. And so this course is going to be the journey back. Slowly, we're going to remove this mud that has accumulated and take us back to the condition that we were in when we entered this life. How far are we going to get? Well, we'll get far enough where you'll know how to take the work forward and continue to polish and remove that mud and that grime that has gotten caked on that jewel. So, are you broken in that condition, in this condition where I was raised by my family and just took on what was taught to me, what was broadcast to me? Are you broken in that situation? Are you broken because you have this feeling that there has to be more to life, but there's this tremendous emptiness? And without being able to find meaning, something that I can really count on, this depression just slowly, it's sort of the fertile ground for depression to start to materialize. What if we take this example? Have you ever seen a horse that was kept in a tiny little corral and it begins to lose the spirit? It begins to cease to express the real spirit and nobility of being a horse. You know, if you think of that horse that's free out in Montana somewhere, running across the meadows, running across the plains, you feel nobility when you see that horse out there playing with another horse, running across that field. And then you see a horse that's being kept from fulfilling the real purpose of its life, and it begins to lose this noble quality. You know, we're raised in this world that turns us into something where we lose temporarily because of the mud that's on that jewel, not permanently. Temporarily, we lose the understanding, we lose the ability to do what we were meant to do, to run free across that plain, across that meadow. You know, when you're encumbered by the feeling of, I have to have this person in my life, I must have my parents' approval, or any other condition in order to be happy, to be content, to fulfill my life, you've gotten penned into something, just like that horse. I'm going to bring it back because I think it's a powerful image. I've gotten penned in by all of this ignorance that was taught to me, that I picked up without even knowing it. And so I get to the point where I'm being chased by the effects of all of this misunderstanding. How about this? I get to the point where my misunderstanding of what I am, this little girl, failing to understand the nature of the shadow that her own body casts when it's in the sun, she ends up becoming terrified of what she doesn't understand about herself, about what, now bringing it back to us, about what life is really all about. So you're not broken at all. And this stirring within you to find out what is this condition all about is the proof that alive within you is still this noble quality, the same as that noble quality in that horse that demands to be free, demands to be imbued with meaning and understanding, demands to know what life is all about. And one more thing that will help, you know, when these questions come of, why did this happen to me and not to the people out there? You know, we don't realize just how close to depression the people around us in this world actually are. They don't know how close to it they are. But we see it all the time. These classes of people, these individuals of a certain walk of life that you would think they would have to be untouched by something like this condition of depression. Yet you see it in the rich and famous, in celebrities, in top-level executives. Some of the most revered professions in our Western world, at least, doctors and dentists and all, and that whole world, are some of the most riddled with this depression. They worked 8 years, 12 years, invested this time to get to this level, and it didn't give what it promised. Getting this position didn't give me what it promised. Getting this relationship, all of these different things. How about people who are banking on finding this permanent happiness when they finally achieve some goal, and they work at it and work at it and work at it, and then it happens and they finally achieve it. And God, what an emptiness I feel. I thought I would feel so much more. Sports athletes, they hint at this all the time. They get interviewed right after, the big winning touchdown or the winning home run in the championship, and they're being interviewed, and, how does it make you feel to finally be world champions? And so often you'll hear, I don't think it's really hit me just yet. They found out firsthand that what they thought was going to be in that moment isn't really in it. You also have the people who are clinging to relationships, hoping that this is how they're going to supply themselves with a feeling of safety, happiness. And when they lose that relationship, you see what happens to them. They plummet into despair, depression, whatever it might be. So when you begin to add all of this up, you look out and you realize that these people who I would have thought would be free of this condition, could never be touched by it, they're facing it. My parents who raised me the best they knew how, again, there's no blame in any of this, I can see that they're not really content within their own life. And I look around at the rest of the people that were part of my life, and very few examples of people who, when I was with them, I felt that all was well. And if I was lucky enough to have a couple of those in my life, more than likely they weren't able to convey what's the secret of that contentment. How do you find that? And so, of course, I was destined to have this head-on collision with depression, of course. Just like you put that horse in that pen, of course it's going to begin to lose its spirit. And so in this world where I think a lot of things are changing, and that's good, but for a long time, maybe the last decade or a couple decades ago, the idea of, you're facing this condition of depression carried a stigma with it. No, we don't talk about this. The person is seen by others as, there's something, like we were talking about, this person's broken, there's something definitely wrong with them. And that isn't the case at all. Somebody who can't be content with just the superficial level of life, that person's here to go deeper, to find out what exists under that superficial level. And so when people look out, don't worry if you have anybody in your life who looks out at you and thinks, how sad. Because they don't know that there's an element, like we talked about in another talk, there's an element of beauty in every condition. There's an element of meaning in every condition. Somebody who you look out at and you can tell there's no love operating in them at all. And you see the effects of having no love in your life. You can see it in this individual. That's an element of beauty. To see the significance of love and what it makes of somebody when it isn't there, when that person has lost their way. has gotten tempted into worlds where that love can't get in and reach them. Apart from that feeling of, I feel like something's missing from my life. See, that love does actually always reach them. But it will often, because I don't know how to let that love in, I will begin to feel just like that horse, starved of fulfilling my real purpose in life. And so I just want to mention that, be ready to forgive. As crazy as this sounds, I'm facing this condition. I'm trying to find my way out of this depression. Now you're asking me to be the one to forgive others? Yeah. Forgive them first of all, because they don't really know what that interior condition is like. And in most cases, they themselves don't know just how close to the same condition they are. If you've ever you remember back in high school, I remember back in grade school, there would be little cliques that formed, little groups of people. And do you remember feeling bad about not being in that clique in school? Or probably even worse, because I remember having this happen too, being in this group and then for some reason they toss you out. And they don't toss you out by saying, hey, you're out of the group. They toss you out by making fun of you, talking about you until you show up, and then they go quiet. Somehow you get tossed out of the clique. Do you remember this? And it was devastating. Here's this reminder of what that experience was like. To be tossed out of that group, to know you weren't welcome there anymore. What's interesting is that here in the case of this photo, so I'm tossed out of the group and I feel terrible. Those two girls in the background who are still in the clique, in the group, who are having fun and feel what is apparently friendship between them. They feel the safety of being in the clique, in the group. If any one of them got tossed out, they would be in the exact same condition as me, as you. Instantly, their happiness, their connection with this group would be gone, and they'd be on their own. They don't know that they are actually living in the exact same condition internally, what they are. Everything about them is just as fragile and it would finally show itself if they got tossed out of the group later today. And I've seen this. I've seen, as you work to understand these things, you'll spot these things. One I like to talk about, because it's so apparent, is, you see two, let's say middle school girls walking down an aisle in a supermarket. And the two of them are chatty, they're laughing, they're bodacious, they're charismatic, engaging, because the two of them have the safety of each other as they walk down that aisle, as they walk through that supermarket. And so they might look something like this. Walking down the aisle at the supermarket, and joyful, gleeful, having a good old time. But if, let's say, they go home and tomorrow one of them has to come back to the store to pick up a couple of items, and you would see them walking through that store in a completely different way. Their whole demeanor would be changed because one of their false supports was taken away from them. The false support of having another person here by my side as I walk through the supermarket. When I have the false support with me, I feel unassailable. I feel like the life of the party. Take that false support away, and suddenly I don't want to be noticed. I just quietly go and I get my items and then I check out. So these false supports, and there's many of them, it can be, and we're talking about the false supports that keeps me from realizing this condition of emptiness, this condition of loneliness, of really just discovering what my actual condition is. And so people will inundate themselves or just keep themselves distracted. Like here's one that everybody knows: getting lost in my phone for hours on end, just scrolling and commenting and liking and all of those things, posting and pictures and everything else. The moment I lose my phone for a day, I lose my life for a day because I've become so dependent upon that distraction. And there's so many other things. There's having the false support of being able to have a certain kind of lifestyle. And so I prop myself up around others because of what I'm able to purchase for myself. Whether it's purchasing a fine meal, or it's purchasing a boat, or anything else like this. There's the distraction of sex. That's a big one. That can become a false support. There's the distraction of opening my own business. There are people who can get distracted for years on end as they pursue opening this business. Now, there is nothing wrong with any of these things in and of themselves. Perfectly fine to open a business. Perfectly fine to enjoy a fine meal. Perfectly fine to have sex. Nothing wrong in and of themselves. But when they are used as this false support to keep my gaze from seeing my actual condition, that's where it becomes a problem. And that's where these individuals, if that false support gets kicked out, are so close to falling into this pit of depression. So all of this is to say, don't give a second thought to judgments from other people, whether they're expressed or implied in their demeanor. Don't worry about any of this. Know that we are all here facing the same condition of, what is this life about? What is this for? And your work to understand this condition and find your way out of it, believe it or not, you will find the very thing that your parents did the best that they could to provide for you, but never knew how to do it. And when you find it, you'll provide it to them. Your very nature will provide it to them. It will be an invitation to them to find something permanent and real. And then, let's go back to the click. When you've found this understanding, now you hold the key to freeing those individuals. Not that it's something that you set out to do as a crusade, but when they see, for example, that they're talking behind your back can't rattle you anymore, when they see that you don't need them, you're happy to be a part of the group, happy to have them with you, but you don't need them. You're not clutching to them in the same way somebody might clutch to a life preserver to keep themselves above the water. When they see that you don't need them anymore, and that you found something in life that gives you meaning regardless of how they treat you, that is quite the invitation. You've brought hope to that group, and they didn't even know that they needed it. You found what's real and permanent. So where to from here? Well, just remember what this condition says about you. Remember those questions of how did this happen to me? All of those questions. I hope we've dispelled any concern for those questions. I'm here to go deeper in this life. I'm here to get below the superficial. And there is something within me which one day, like I said in one of the other earlier talks, you'll be so grateful that this part was in you that wasn't satisfied with the superficial. Because it kept you seeking until you found real answers. So up next, we're going to be looking at, this is a question that comes up from time to time, and it can be a stumbling block for some people. Well, this depression, isn't this just a matter of a chemical imbalance? We're going to cover that briefly. And then we'll go, and then maybe one more lesson, then we're going to plunge in to the real meat of this material, that phase one that we talked about, where we're going to find out what is it that creates depression? How does it create it? How does it operate? All right, so that's coming up.